Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Michael Singh. Michael is currently the editor at Waking the Red, a Toronto FC website, as well as covering esports and Raptors Uprising. In this episode, I chat with Michael about producing content amidst the pandemic, the return to the MLS, writing on Toronto FC, and the opportunities to report on esports. The Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. This is episode 36 of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, for today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I am joined by Michael Singh. He is the managing editor of Waking the Red, a Toronto FC SB Nation website. He's also an esports reporter, a freelance writer for MapleLeafs.com. He does it all. Michael, welcome to the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. How are you?
Lucas, thanks for having me, man. I'm great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and it's my pleasure to have you on because I get to tell this really funny story of how we first met last year.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
Yes, sir.
we're going to take a trip down memory lane to start before we get into your career, because we're both covering TFC, and it's back when there were live sports. Crowds could come together. It was normal times. And I walked to the press box at BMO Field and, take my seat in, and here's this guy, beside me. And I'm like, Waking the Red, what is this website? And it happens to be you, but I find out that you have the audacity to go to the press box without your media credentials, somehow sneak past security and make it up there. And you're like, Lucas, where do you find this credential? I'm like, Mike, aren't you like the managing editor or something, man? Like, are you supposed to know this stuff? So that's how we started out. And so for anyone who needs to get by security, Michael's your guy.
I'm your guy for sure. If you guys need any sort of advice getting by BMO Field security, just hit me up. You guys know where to find me. No, that was a really funny day. It was actually my first time covering a TFC game at the BMO Field press box. And I remember seeing you at the elevator. And honestly, you look at you, always professional. I'm like, okay, that guy's definitely a journalist. So I go up to him like, hey, buddy, any chance you can sort of help me out here? I think I remember telling you it was my first time actually being here. And I remember you walking me up to the press box. And that's actually how we got acquainted. And then I think a little bit after that's when I realized, hey, hold on. I see everyone else with the media pass around. Where the heck's my guys? Like, come on. I'm supposed to be, at my first TFC game. I want some sort of memory from this. Long story short, you helped me figure that out. So yeah, I still to this day, I remember that for sure. So thank you, Lucas.
Look, anytime, man, helping someone out who does some great work at Waking the Red. And Mike, maybe we can just start with the news of the day, which of course, we're stuck, in our homes because of the COVID-19 pandemic, rather than being at the pitch or covering sports. But I want to get your thoughts on the recent news coming from the MLS about their proposal about restarting the season in Orlando and having a tournament style, to restart the season. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that, because as we're recording this, the Canada-US border restrictions are extended by another month. So for a team like Toronto, they're going to be needing to restart in the US.
Yeah, I guess I'll be the bearer of bad news if you guys haven't figured it out yet, but there's not going to be games at BMO Field anytime in the foreseeable future. Even when that border does loosen up a little bit, you're still going to have to convince everyone else to travel over to a different country. All these players who are most players reside in the States, right? Toronto FC are in a unique situation, just from speaking from an MLS perspective. Specifically, they're in a unique situation because they're one of only 3 Canadian MLS teams. So the majority of people reside in the U.S. already. So convincing them to cross borders won't necessarily be easy. But convincing Toronto FC, the minority, to go play in the U.S., that's probably more of a feasible feat for Major League Soccer. So for the time being, I mean, that's where TFC are going to play their games. They're going to play in the States, whether or not it is in this tournament in Orlando, which the MLS is proposing. That's supposed to kick off on July 1st, whether or not it's that or whether or not it is, kicking off their regular season games in August, perhaps still in Orlando at a undetermined location right now. I personally believe that we are going to be seeing a lot of Toronto FC games played not at BMO Field this year.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you. And even with TFC reopening their practice facility at the BMO training ground, like it's still, under, strict social distancing guidelines. And even I'm sure, the games that'll resume the MLS season are going to be without fans. And Michael, I mean, you and I both know, I mean, the MLS has grown over the years, but
Oh
it's
yeah,
still a gate revenue league.
yeah,
And, it doesn't have the luxury like the NFL, the NBA of, multi-billion-dollar TV deals. It's a gate revenue league. So while at first it's going to start without fans, eventually, I mean, and obviously we need to wait to see, what the virus does in dictating, policy in terms of having fans back in stadiums. But eventually, the MLS needs fans back in seats because it's just not going to survive solely on the TV contracts.
yeah. I can't say that I don't disagree with you there. I mean, eventually we're going to have to see some fans back, but there there are teams now in Europe who are getting really creative. Obviously, their leagues are a little bit more developed and a little bit more um, they're established. That's the word I'm looking for. They're a little bit more established already, and they're the biggest leagues in the world. So they can get by a little bit easier than MLS say would if they just went on with no fans. But they've been getting creative, having virtual fans in the seats, for example, having fans pay a small price for that. Um, and they're maybe they're providing more exclusive content for their fans. But I think they're gonna have to get a little bit more creative in finding ways to increase revenue, because regardless of whether or not MLS wants to put fans in seats, it's going to come down to health officials, public health officials, and again, for the foreseeable future, that seems a very, very remote possibility. No pun intended there, I guess.
No, for sure. And of course, many soccer fans were greeted to the reopening of the Bundesliga, even without fans. It was just great to have live sports back. And I think the Bundesliga, Michael, is going to be an experiment just to see, the rest of the world. Can a league come back safely with adequate testing for its players? And, hopefully, fingers crossed it can, because then I'm sure the Premier League will get back on again. And then hopefully some of the North American leagues will as well. So I think all of North America right now is really intent on seeing how the Bundesliga does in terms of coming back.
Yeah, for sure. And just as of recording this, I think the Premier League yesterday announced that, or maybe perhaps it was on Saturday after the Bundesliga started, that they'd be I guess, starting to come back, starting their ways. But today, it turns out that 6 players tested positive for coronavirus. So now, how do they handle this? Is that done for the Premier League season? But we'll see. Obviously, by the time I'm sure this episode airs, and
Yeah.
from there, a lot will transpire. But this is one of the problems that everybody was faced. This was the worst case scenario. What happens if a player gets coronavirus?
Well, you
Right?
know what, Michael? It's funny because I think back in March when the NBA shut down with Rudy Gobert and subsequently all the other sports leagues, my thought was, okay, even one player tests positive upon return, everything's going to be shut down again. But obviously, things are going to change in the near future. But I really believe that they want to build a system where even if there are players who test positive, like the Premier League, even the Bundesliga, there was a team that had players that tested positive, that they
Hmm.
can still have a mechanism where they can isolate those players and still continue the league operations. So it's going to be interesting. And look, you said it yourself. Like, it's, you know, Is it safe? You know, is there economic pressure here? Probably there is, because a lot of these leagues have TV deals and TV contracts that they have to abide, and they don't want to lose out on any money. And at the end of the day, it goes back to this: the virus is going to dictate where this goes, and it's going to dictate how, as you say, public health officials handle the policy and handle the guidelines. But fascinating stuff. But anyway, Michael, I want to shift gears to your young journalism career, and you're the second guest that I've had on from Centennial College's graduate sports journalism program. I said off the top all the things you're doing, but was soccer always the sport that you had in mind to cover as you were getting into the industry?
Lucas, let me tell you, when I wanted to come in the industry, I wanted to cover every sport. I am a sport, especially Toronto sports. I am a Toronto sports fanatic. MLS, I could name like every Toronto FC player. MLB, I can name every Toronto FC player. Or sorry, Toronto Blue Jays player. To every Toronto Raptors player, every Toronto Maple Leafs player. You know, go down the list. I could do it. And that's been me since I could remember. I've been invested thoroughly in Toronto sports. So when I first started coming in the industry, I'm just like, hey, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this. And it really took, after I interned at Sportsnet, after my internship, really after that is when I realized it's not just going to work. I'm sort of spread too thinly right now, if that makes sense. I'm trying to dip my toes into this sort of water, this water, but I'm not really dissecting it. I'm not really getting to the core of what needs to be broken down. So that's when I sort of realized, you know, this is going to be my focus. I got a break with the MLS there, and you know, Raptors Uprising reached out to me, George Fidel. I guess he saw some of my content and he liked what I did, so he reached out to me and he said, we're looking for a writer. We want you to do recaps, features, and previews, stuff like that for us. And I'm like, yes, please, Toronto sports team, sign me up. That's where I want to work. So it was really then I realized, okay, this is how you are going to start to kind of drive an audience, is when you start putting out the same sort of content. Because you can write when I was at Sportsnet, I wrote like 500 articles just because of, again, my knowledge of various types of sports. I wrote like anytime like news would break, I could grab that and I can turn that over very quickly, just because, again, of how well I knew different types of sports. So I realized after that, when I was working with Raptors Uprising, is when I invest myself into just one sport, I can create content now that people really, really care about, because it's new content. It's not just, you know, repetitive saying, me analyzing, but like, how well can someone know if they don't really dedicate their life to that sort of profession? Or not their life, but their focus, that profession. If you're just doing it in 5 different fields, no one's really going to take you seriously to an extent, right? Especially if you're a young journalist.
No, for sure.
So yeah, I can go on blabbing about that for a long time. But
that's some great advice, because I find, as a young reporter and many journalists who are listening to this, you know, you definitely want to generalize at first, because I think, you know, you want to show at a young age your versatility, that you could parachute into BMO Field and write on TFC, and then you can parachute into a junior hockey arena and write about junior hockey. But someone once told me, you know, generalize until you get paid to specialize. And I think the notion that you're talking about, because let's just take TFC, for example. Toronto FC is a very niche following. It's not like the Leafs, the Raptors, the Blue Jays. It's growing, but it's still very niche. And I find with you, especially your experience with Waking the Red, like, if you can cultivate that following of TFC fans and really work diligently on writing good stories, reporting, etc., you can occupy that space that not many people are occupying, compared to being a Maple Leafs reporter that's trying to occupy space with dozens of other journalists and reporters who've been there for a lot longer than you have.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you put it perfectly there. Generalize until you get paid to specialize. Um, I didn't start specializing, I guess, until I was paid to specialize. If you want to put it that way, I got paid, to obviously join the team and write for the team, um, and then waking the red as well. I mean, it's paid work that really, um, I guess, started to motivate me into sort of specializing there. Um, I guess what I could say from just my sort of experience is you can't really um, fake the passion. Like you either have it or you don't. So the reason why I was able to sort of, I guess, adapt and kind of find my way into these new industries, new fields, was because I really did have a passion for Toronto sports. I don't care what Toronto sports team is playing. If there's a Toronto sports game going on, I'm in it, and I want that Toronto sports team to win because I like the competition. I've grew up in I grew like my whole life is here, and I understand what it was like to be a Australian Toronto sports fan. So anytime that I can sort of get on that kind of bandwagon, I try to, and I try to invest myself into it. So regardless of what you're doing out there, like make sure you're passionate about it, man. Like don't fake that because it's going to show eventually. Like you can put out strong work for 2, 3, 4 weeks, but if you don't like what you're doing, it'll start to show.
No, I definitely agree with that, and it's another piece of advice that I got is never take a piece off, and what I mean by that is like when you're writing, you treat every piece like it's your last, and you put in 110% effort into those pieces, even if it's like hard news like a trade or a signing, which in these times doesn't feel as important, but like to then the feature article on a player or an interview on a player. I think on social media these days, when you're trying to build your brand, your following, those followers will definitely see that. And I noticed that, when I got started out, writing and pushing out more of my content, that people are like, okay, like this is really good stuff. And like the articles that, you may think, don't mean as much or don't matter, there may be a lot of people out there that really care about it, which is why you should always put all of your resources and your energy into every piece that you put out there.
Yeah, and it's not only that. The one thing that I learned from interning at Sportsnet was when I went into Sportsnet, I wanted to be the next insider man. Like, let me tell you, I was trying to be the next, obviously TSN has Bob McKenzie, but I was trying to be the next Bobby Mack of hockey because I had such a passion for this industry. I I couldn't even tell you, and I was writing nonstop, and I thought I was doing really really well. But now when I take a look back, and it's been over a year since I interned at Sportsnet now. When I take a look back, I see that the job at hand, which was an associate editor intern, I could have focused a lot more on that actual job at hand
Mm.
rather than me trying to go out there and talk to all these different people, try and get these exclusive interviews, exclusive content, versus doing these little tasks that are right in front of me that make the world of a difference, as you sort of alluded to. There is, you never know who's reading your writing, whether it's a hard news article, whether it is that feature. You never know. So, like you said, put everything into that task at hand, and don't think any task is too small.
And speaking of, your experiences covering Toronto FC, I want to get into, covering the team and
Yeah.
last year, which both of us did, because there were some really exciting moments. But for you, like just, I remember like on that day where we first met and you forgot your press credential, you, you told me that you just sort of like, you got this job, you just got this job that you were on that, because of, changes in the organization structure, you then became the managing editor. So for
Yeah.
you, like, what was that like to have that opportunity, so young, to be managing, this site that, lots of passionate Canadian soccer fans go to, while then trying to, learn the ropes of being at BMO Field and covering TFC?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit more about me. I grew up playing soccer my entire life. I was actually really damn good at the sport. I went to a sports high school called Peak, and there's a few like notable other professional athletes that went there, hockey players, but I went there for soccer. I guess some of those athletes include like Connor McDavid, the Subban family, um, stuff like that. So this was like a school of about 100 kids, but again, I was the soccer player there. There's maybe about 12, 13 other soccer players. So soccer was always an embedded passion for me. It I can tell you, like that was my sport that I played because I was really damn good at it. Um, Obviously, I didn't go pro with it, so I've always had that sort of passion for soccer again. I had BMO Field season tickets since like 2010, so I know my way around the supporter section of BMO Field. But I guess I never really. And again, thank you to you. You showed me the press box side of things, and I got my feet wet there a little bit. It was great to come into Waking Red after the successful managers that we've had in the past. I did a really good job at setting up the foundation for the website, just to be able to work after them, and in that sort of environment was honestly nothing short of a dream come true for me. And even today, like I still pinch myself when I get to do some of the things that I get to do, the access that I have, my relationships now that I've built through Waking the Red, through just having connections now in the industry is something I never thought. I'm still I'm still at the very beginning, but it's something that I never really realized I can get here this now. Like I have these connections. It's really cool.
What is the Toronto FC fan base like?
Toronto FC fan base is like no other fan base I've come across yet. You know, there are a lot of people who grew up in Canada playing soccer, um, and they never really had that outlet to support. Everyone that I knew that liked soccer growing up, I always asked them what their favorite team was, and it's always going to be a European team, whether it's Real Madrid, Manchester United. But there were still people that would wake up, every Saturday morning, make sure they turn on, whether it be Sportsnet that was showing the games, make sure they have all those games on, all those Premier League games on. So then in 2007, when Toronto FC first launched their season, um, those first 5 years were absolutely jaw dropping. You couldn't go into the stadium. You couldn't sit down. Even though Toronto FC sucked, you couldn't sit down because these fans are the most passionate fans that I've come across. I used to tell people all the time, even up until last year at Centennial, half my presentation were about Toronto FC and how it was the best kept secret. Um, in Toronto, just because every time I took someone to a game, I would have 4 tickets, and I always tried to take like two other people to a game. Um, I would always tell them it's the best kept secret in Toronto, and they would love it because of the atmosphere. Not necessarily the biggest soccer fans, but you go down to BMO Field on a Saturday night, and the sun's out, and you got the nice cool breeze off the ocean right by Liberty Village. There, it's a vibe, man. It's a vibe for sure.
It definitely is, and I'll never forget like the first. I happened to get into TFC a little bit later, just because when you're growing up, it's Leafs, Raptors, Blue Jays, but then
Definitely.
once TFC became really good, my first ever game was actually their first home playoff game against Philadelphia Union, and it was freezing. Like you talk
Nice.
about those Saturday nights in the summer. You're trying, when that lake effect comes through BMO, it's freezing in October. But boy, is that atmosphere electric, and especially for the playoffs with just everyone packed in there and showing that spirit. Of course, what a time now to be following TFC with, they made the MLS Cup final 2016. They won in 2017. And then, of course, last year, and that's where I want to get to, because, of course, we had the chance to be, right there covering some of those big games. And last year's season to me was remarkable, because they started out slow, but head coach Greg Vanney, always talked about, okay, finding this identity, and eventually it's going to click. And then they went on that just incredible streak leading up to the playoffs. The first game that I met you at was that win against the Colorado Rapids, and it just felt like from there that they were going to be a tough out, and it just then allowed them to get to the final, even with Josie out the door hurt and a lot of questions, but they were able to do it, and they just had a lot of tough characters on that team that were able to come together and really give opponents difficulties.
Yeah, no, for sure. And they established, just going back to last year, they established themselves as a team that was not going to be easy to beat. And that started definitely in their midfield. If you want to get specific a little bit, Marky Delgado, obviously it started with Captain Michael Bradley there. It's at the holding midfield position. But Marky Delgado and Jonathan Osorio, there are two players you don't want to run into on a soccer field, right? You're going to go into a tackle with them. So just little things like that just set the tone for that team. And I think that carried throughout the playoffs. Unfortunately, they fell just short in the end there to Seattle. But I think what's really remarkable, and it's what's kind of really also disappointing about 2020, is just how good this team was set up to be. They had so much of their core returning. They added a absolute star in Pablo Piatti, who we haven't even seen yet. They had some of their young pieces who are now up and coming. This team is really set up to be an absolute dynasty. And I have a few pieces coming out about that, I guess, hopefully next week for Wake in the Red. But like future, present, like this team was set. And I was really excited to see what they were going to do in 2020. And unfortunately, obviously that got postponed for now. But, we'll never know. We'll see. We'll see.
And the one game to me, Michael, that stands out was that home playoff game against DC United last year. And the fact that TFC was up 1-0 at the half, and Quentin Westberg, I mean, he made some just crazy saves early in that game. I remember on Wayne Rooney, one shot point blank that he stopped. But then DC United ties the game in stoppage time in the second half, and here we go again, Toronto sports, here we go. We're always set up for disaster. And then what happened in that extra time was unlike anything I've ever seen, a Toronto soccer team do, 4 goals in that stoppage time. It was wild. And it just sort of painted this never give up mantra that this team had, which we then saw when they faced off against Atlanta in the conference final.
Yeah, man, that feels like forever ago, Lucas.
I know. Hearing the crowd and everything that was it was just crazy that it was at the end of last year, and here we are stuck at our homes.
I know. I have goosebumps, man, thinking back to it and how loud that crowd was. Even the press box, people were up and yelling and making some noise, which is definitely not capital J.
No. They were doing who they were supporting for. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. But no, that was such a fun run, and just thinking back to it now, it's crazy to think about how far we've come and where the world is now. But it's definitely something I'll always hold special to me, because that crowd was electric.
And just for the record, Michael and I were not jumping up and down the press box. So just for the record, for anyone listening to this,
That doesn't sound like me.
But just speaking about where how far we've come and the growth of soccer. Another game that really stood out to me last year was Canada USA at BMO Field, middle of October, and I know that things didn't work out on the road in Orlando for Canada, but that night at BMO Field to me was equally as special as that DC United game, because I think even though there weren't as many fans as a normal TFC game, I think it showed the potential of what our men's soccer team could become. And of course, we saw over the weekend Alphonso Davies with the return of the Bundesliga, what he is doing. But I don't know about you, Mike, but I'm confident about this Canadian men's team, especially with John Herdman as the head coach, who has a lot of experience coaching the women's Canadian team that of course, has dominated for many, many years.
For sure, Lucas, let me tell you, Canada soccer is on a wave. I don't know what is in the water in Brampton up there, but there are some young phenoms coming out of Brampton. and you're going to hear their names sooner rather than later. I'll tell you that much. Um, Canada soccer is, like I said, it's on the upward trend, and that yes, Alfonso Davies obviously headlines that, but you have players like Jonathan David, who are going to make multi-million-dollar transfers to big clubs, obviously hopefully later this summer. But yes, he'll be on the move this summer. You're gonna see like a lot of young up and coming Toronto FC product or academy products like Jaden Nelson break through, Liam Fraser kind of start to break through. Um, these are talented players who can actually make a difference on the international level. So we saw a little taste of that back in October 15th. Of course, I remember the day right off the top of my head when Canada beat USA, a monumental day. And I think that was really just this the match that really kind of turned the page on what was Canada soccer, and I think what will be Canada soccer.
No, absolutely. And I think it's just going to grow with, the World Cup coming in this decade. Hopefully by 2025, fans can be in stadiums. Who knows? But, it really is on the rise. And I think, I hope that more, from the television side, like, and no disrespect to One Soccer, they do an incredible job in terms of broadcasting soccer. But I really do believe that eventually, Canadian soccer needs to be on national television. And,
Mm-hmm.
in order to get that level of popularity and that level of awareness, like the Toronto Raptors, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto FC, because while, of course, there were dark days in Canadian soccer, particularly the men's team, I think at the end of the day, like it's growing and the popularity is just going to grow over the years when we see the Alfonso Davies, the Jonathan Davids grow and continue to get better.
Yeah, no, you make a good point. I think one day we will get there. Um, like you said, it starts with winning, and we're going to see a lot more of that hopefully in the up and coming years. But you hit the nail on the head. If these guys want to really become global superstars, they need that global attention, and it starts really here in your home country.
I want to end things off, Michael, by talking about your involvement with Raptors Uprising
Let's
and just,
go.
esports in general, because to me, esports is really niche, but it's still, but it still has a very, reasonable following, when I, scour through social media late at night, trying to figure out, what's going on in the media landscape. And to me, though, I feel like with esports, with no sports happening right now, is there an opportunity, to get more of a following? You feel, following esports, or do you think it's still too early before it can become, entrenched with some of the sports that we know and love and have been institutions in our society and culture for many years?
Yeah, I think the people who are following esports right now are really the Dopplers of the industry. Um, it's really the early goings of the industry. To answer your question, it does take a little bit while for people to become as entrenched in it. But with the generation now growing up of people my age, people your age who could grow up probably playing video games, they can relate to this stuff kind of a little bit more than the elderly people can. So when we do like today's Tuesday. I said Tuesday's game will be on Sportsnet 1, for example. So we are starting to see that growing trend of esports is starting to kind of get recognition. Of course, obviously with the pandemic going on, it's getting a little bit more recognition. But it's gonna be a little while before I think people get entrenched in it. But we are starting to see more mainstream media outlets start to cover the team. I've noticed Sportsnet doing a lot more coverage of the team. And Neil Davidson is obviously doing some great work there at the Canadian Press. Obviously, he's always great for covering the team as well. So it doesn't hurt that the team's also winning. Right now, this Raptors Uprising's 4-0 this season. They play tonight against Knicks Gaming at 7 p.m. So if they continue to win, I can only imagine that it's only going to be greater for Canada because they're the only Canadian professional NBA 2K League team, right?
And Michael, I mean, again, it goes back to the point of creating new content. And, this is such a relatively new space. And for you, during this pandemic, I think a lot of writers and journalists are, trying, are handling it in different ways, and
Hmm.
that's totally okay to handle it in different ways. But I think creating new content is so vital. And for you, the fact that you're reporting on this relatively new sport and new space, it just continues to add legitimacy and credibility to you as a journalist, that you're willing to go to different untapped spaces and provide really unique content on it.
Yeah, and like I said, if there's a Toronto sports team, I'm there. um, and yeah, esports. Anytime you can kind of create content, it will be virtually new content. For it's not a hidden secret, guys. If you guys want to get into esports, go create content. It there's a market there for sure. But like I said, if it's something that you want to do just because you want to get into a market, you'll probably be weaved out in 3-4 weeks, because these guys are gamers who read the stuff, so they know what they're talking about. So you better know what you're talking about. You better be willing to do the work to know what you're talking about. Um, Now, in terms of Raptors Uprising, again, I just wanted to touch on the team a little bit again. There, they've done such a great job at diversifying the way that they attract different audiences, whether it is through my writing on the website, whether it is through the multimedia graphics that Ryan Griffin's, jotting up there with Colton Hill to help with him. And they're starting to just like we see. I walked downstairs last night. My mom was watching The Voice, and I just saw that there are people judging The Voice via like a Zoom chat, and they do this really unique presentation of everything. And we're seeing that now in the esports industry, where they're really the first ones to get this going. Um, and we're finding new unique ways to really broadcast the game to the audience. And if you guys tune in on Sportsnet and catch any of the games, you can see that this is really revolutionary, and maybe this is the way the sports will be going.
No, for sure. And if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's be adaptable, because change is coming, a new normal is coming, and I think as journalists we need to be on top of those new trends that are going to become normal in the industry. Michael Singh, he is the managing editor at Waking the Red. He's an esports reporter for Raptors Uprising. Michael, thank you so much for joining me on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Lucas, thanks for having me, man. It was a pleasure. Hope it's all is well with you, man.